Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously, without instruction.
See what the Empire has done to your lives? Your families and your freedom?
Good people will fight if we lead them.
The rebellion is spreading.
Now we take the war to them.
The Republic will be reorganized.
Systems either change or die.
Into the first.
You give way to an enemy this evil with this much power, and you condemn the galaxy to an eternity of submission.
And wake up. There is one way. Be fighting from the start.
Long live the Empire!
Fight the Empire!
Let's call it war.
Remember this. Try.
Hey, Sophie.
Hey, Eleanor.
What's the difference between the Republic and the Empire?
One is run by a kleptocratic elite, and the other is the Empire.
That's funnier than what I was going to say. That's funnier. Hello and welcome to Daughters of Ferrix, the Star Wars podcast with politics, history, and a publicly available email address. I'm your host, Eleanor Mueller, and with me is my co-host, Sophia Dunstan.
Live from Salt Lake City, the city that always sleeps and goes to bed at 9.
It's not really live. It's more like a week and a half prior.
Close enough.
Before our show today, I'm contractually obligated to offer a heartfelt thank you to Johnny Schmidt, Aaron Craig, Jorge Defendini, Anthony Galaviz, Christian H., Frank Cole, Erica Hoffman, and Duncan McWannell for supporting us over on Patreon. And thanks to Charles Gates for increasing your contribution. You are all the Imperial transponder codes that help this stolen shuttle of a show bypass security checkpoints. The security checkpoints are
The need for a job.
a capitalist system in which trans people are unfairly discriminated against. Let's go. Let's go discrimination.
Go team. Yeah, I'm pro discrimination.
Clip that, folks. If you're interested in early access to the show, episode outtakes, the Daughters of Ferrix Discord server, and an April bonus episode that'll come out eventually, check us out at patreon.com/Daughters of Ferrix. All right. I see this show as pretty dynamic. We talk about a wide range of topics with varying episode structures. I like to keep it pretty loose. Both of our research styles are a little madcap and benefit from a degree of flexibility. I never decide too far in advance what our topics will be, because plans can and do change.
What was it that we were talking about on the car, like in the gorge?
Oh, yeah, yes, we were talking about sort of rural.
Oh, yeah. Rural identity. Like, so, yeah, the point being that we just come up with stuff and then we're like,
Yeah, we are like, Good one, Sophie. All of that to say, when I said in the bonus episode upload 2 weeks ago that we'd be back for an episode about Coruscant, I should have known that that would be a fucking lie. Sophie was gracious enough to help drive my partner and I out here to beautiful Portland, Oregon. But as it happens, when you drive hundreds and hundreds of miles across several days, one of you has schoolwork and taxes and a job to juggle, the other has an entire apartment's worth of belongings to reassemble. It is not the best recipe for recording a research-intensive episode 4 days later. So, we're not doing that yet. Instead, dear listeners, we have some catch-up to do. Fundamentally, this is a show that's limited in its scope. I may know some stuff about political theory and whatever, but I'm ultimately a hobbyist. I'm an uneducated college dropout. Sophie liked Star Wars as a kid and could tell you who Pong Krell is, but she hasn't even finished Rebels. We try to make up for one another's topical inadequacies, but even within that, we have an extremely limited perspective. We are two white transgender women who live in America, which means we don't know what it's like to be people of color, or non-American, or transmasc, or educated differently, or whatever.
Or a Star Trek fan.
Neither of us knows what that's like. We're not that type of loser.
No, sir. I am no Star Trek in my household.
You would. Sophia would never. But all of that is why we ask people to email in. We get lots of messages from excited listeners just like you who have insightful things to say, questions to ask, and perspectives to add. And I'm really grateful for that. I want this show to be something of a dialogue between people who are interested in the political dimensions of Star Wars. So, in the first installment of hopefully many, let's take an episode just to spotlight those of you who mailed in. We're talking about the Republic. We're talking about political messaging and media. We're talking about Latin American Revolution and liberal politicians. Let's go.
This is the Daughters of Ferrix Mailbag episode.
I think I'm going to call it Mail from the HoloNet, but I'm not sure about that.
Oh, that's pretty good.
I don't expect to do these episodes very often because I like doing the mail at the end of the episodes. But we kind of let it slide because we had the bonus episode upload and because we didn't do a lot lately. So it makes sense to play catch up. We'll get around to another one of these, but that could be like months and months and months and months out. So our first email is from Jinkster99, one of our patrons actually. Hi, Jinkster. They say, "Hey daughters, my question involves the prequels, which while I'm very aware of people's differing opinions on, I happen to love getting a view into the messy politics, wartime, and sometimes world building of that era. This question is specifically about slavery and its role in the Republic. Forgive me if you've already spoken about this before, but something that I've always been drawn to is the Jedi's weird relationship with slavery. It often feels like we're being sold this narrative, that they were forced into a position to purchase an army of sentient beings who pretty much have no rights in a republic they were bred and engineered to fight and die for. This is seemingly antithetical to what the Jedi stand for, but it's not the first or last time we see the Jedi engage in the slave trade, whether for good, like purchasing and freeing Anakin, or the events previously mentioned. I often think about, had Palpatine not been victorious in ending the Republic, what would have been the fate of the clones and their role in a seemingly peaceful Republic where they have no autonomy or rights, and as far as we know, no legislation in place to address the situation."
Are we gonna see like clone reconstruction where like the government gives all the clones like 50 acres and a mule? Probably not. And that's not to say that like happened in our timeline, but I don't know. The thing about every institution ever is that it always seems to get involved with something horrible somehow. Well, am I wrong?
No, it's just, I don't know. I wouldn't say it's quite defeatist, but it could be.
Yeah, since I am a liberal triumphalist, which I am, let's be clear.
Jesus.
History has ended.
Yeah, it's over.
It's so over.
Nothing's happening again.
It is so over.
Me when democracy is over.
Oh, I saw this quiz on Twitter where someone was like, would you kill democracy to stop climate change? And it was like a large majority of yes.
If everyone votes in favor of removing democracy, isn't that the most democratic thing that can happen?
No.
Think about it.
No, I get, but the point being, like, the slave trade, it's very easy to somehow get yourself involved with that in Star Wars, I guess.
Whomst among us has not gotten involved with the slave trade?
Okay, but seriously, like you look at any part of the world today, I guarantee if you go back 150 years, it's like they helped with the slave trade. Isn't that lovely?
In response to the question, what would have been the fate of the clones, it's important to remember that the way in which the clones were phased out at the dawn of the Empire was not, shall we say, natural. It was extremely forced on the part of Palpatine and on the part of Tarkin. It was this really intentional thing to get them out of the way. I think the Republic would have maintained some standing army. I think a lot of clones would have been in crisis. I think there would have been a real problem with, like, what to do with veterans of this war. I don't think they would have continued purchasing clones, but I think the ones that remained probably would have just stayed in the Grand Army of the Republic. And I don't think that's great either.
I don't know if they would stop purchasing clones, because the thing about like really traumatic, large-scale military conflicts is that they tend to make countries that don't have standing militaries decide to have a standing military. The US, for example, basically had no military until in peacetime, until after World War II, except the Navy.
Another L for Hitler.
Hitler created the military-industrial complex.
The relationship of the Jedi to the clones is complicated. And I think fundamentally we have to remember, despite them being distinct entities that deserve rights, that deserve representation, most people in the Republic do not view clones as a legitimate type of person. I guess if you're trans and a clone, it really doubles up there. But like the Jedi often view droids as second class and don't do anything about that. I mean, there are instances of Jedi going to quash droid uprisings because the droids did violence and droids don't deserve more than they've got, you know? So it is this really uneasy tension. I think on a larger scale, at this point in time, the Jedi are dogs of the military. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood moment, you know? know.
They're imperialist lackeys and running dogs.
Yeah, they try to act independently of the Republic in some ways. They try to consider themselves separate, but they aren't. They are so lost in the sauce that it affects a lot of their decision-making ability. And during wartime, many Jedi know, because they can feel them through the Force, because they form relationships with them, that clones are people, that they have feelings and needs and sapience. And the Jedi care about the clones, but the Jedi are also invested in this war and invested in the perpetuation of the Republic. And so the personhood of the clones takes a back seat to that. And I do think that that is reflective of the Jedi's fallen state. And if there is an ideal version of the Jedi Order, I should hope it is not one that is complicit in that. And maybe it still is. Maybe the Jedi are fucked regardless. But I think you're right to recognize that. To some degree, it is true that the Republic doesn't have jurisdiction on Tatooine. But I think you are right to feel uneasy about the Jedi looking at problems outside of the Republic and going, well, we're Republic. I would want them to be separate.
So what you're calling for here is the separation of church and state.
I am calling for the separation of state and church, I think is the line I keep using with regard to the Jedi. I think the integration of the Jedi into the Republic in such an overt, aggressive way has done more harm to the Jedi than not. I think that's very clear from the prequels. And the slavery angle is a big part of that. I think it kind of exclusively exists as a moral question in Star Wars to highlight the flaws of the Jedi. Next, let's hear from friend of the show, Joel Davis. Joel says, "Hello, Daughters of Ferrix. Less a question and more of an observation this time around, and that is that I think new canon has done quite well in showing the evil of the Empire in a way I don't think even the original trilogy did. In the original trilogy, yes, we see Alderaan being destroyed, but outside A New Hope, we don't really see the evil of the Empire. Since we're always in the Outer Rim, we don't see the oppression, destruction, or pain the Empire causes. In the new era, we see what I call the domestic evil of the Empire, from things like Rogue One, from the occupation of Jeddah, to what I call the airport security scene in Solo. Plus, of course, there's the Bad Batch and the evil science we've been seeing. Have you noticed that the new era of Star Wars has been a lot better of showing the evil of the Empire compared to the original trilogy? Love the podcast as always."
I don't think I knew it explicitly, but now that someone says, yeah, that is definitely a bigger theme of Empire era canon. In the original trilogy, we kind of get like, I don't know, World War II fighter pilot perspective on the Empire, right? Like the Empire is primarily bad insofar as it is the enemy that I am fighting in a war, but we don't see it like, you know, gassing Wookiees or whatever.
I think a big part of this is like the change in perspective. You are right, Joel, that it is sort of a domestic evil in recent canon. I want to say all of this very much brings to mind a TikTok that was making the rounds a few weeks back, where the creator writes, and I'm going to mostly state this verbatim because they have some spelling errors that I don't care to fix. "I'm so bored seeing how Disney Star Wars writing is lazy. Do you remember how epic Empire first scene in Star Wars was? The Tantive 4 battle? With Star Wars being bought by Disney, you see elite shock troopers deployed to crush some very poorly equipped farmers, and also committing war crimes to show us how evil they are. Because when you have a $447 million budget, you can't pay a writer to have an smart scenario. Let's make the Empire hurt children to show us they are the bad guys. Let's make them deploy an entire army to invade an unarmed village. Where are the epic battles now? Where are the wars in Star Wars?"
That is such a dumb take.
It is a dumb take. Everyone in the comments agrees that it is a dumb take. So don't be thinking that this is like an especially popular idea. This is not a TikToker with a big platform. This specific post got like 1,000 likes or something. But I think there is a non-zero amount of people in the general audience who essentially view any sort of moralizing in stories as insufferable virtue signaling, right? The Empire is the bad guys in a de facto way, but there's no reason for it. The position we take as the audience, siding with the rebels, is largely arbitrary, which is silly. The Empire, again, blows up a couple billion people on Alderaan within an hour of their introduction. But also, Joel, you correctly mentioned to me a few days ago on Twitter that what virtues are being signaled with the portrayal of the Empire does shift. You specifically named the Galactic Empire in the 90s as clearly being influenced by the USSR. This is something that comes up in the history and politics of Star Wars, where Kempshall writes of the 90s EU that The Empire is composed of different aspects from a variety of authoritarian and dictatorial regimes. Imperial repression of political protests seems inspired by both the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. The formation of a lasting state ideology based around the concept of order comes from both the Soviet Union and George Orwell's 1984, while the internal rivalries that beset the imperial hierarchy are also drawn from Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union as ruled by Joseph Stalin. However, the process through which these aspects of regimes are transferred into the empire is as much based on the perception of tyranny as it is the reality.
Spicy.
So, Star Wars, being contemporary mythology, portrays contemporary ideas of what an evil regime is and how it operates. There's a really great Tumblr thread which describes the way that Chuck Wendig wrote The Empire in the Aftermath trilogy about a decade ago as a very modern empires aren't just bad on an overarching generic scale, but also to individuals, and holy fuck does this get horrifying when you dig into it. Or to put it another way, 90s Star Wars looks at the Empire and says, we don't need to say why Nazis are bad. And modern Star Wars says, okay, clearly some of y'all didn't get the fucking point, so it has to call it out specifically. In Star Wars, we're getting more Imperial-era stories from the vantage point of people who have to live through it. Is it any wonder that these sort of stories cropped up in a time where global fascism was once again on the rise, where it very suddenly felt immensely important to not just understand that imperialism and bigotry and authoritarianism were bad, but how they were bad, how they could happen, and how they could harm people in an actual material way. In the 70s, authoritarianism was understood as that thing that those other countries did that one time. In the Star Wars of the past decade, fascism comes home.
We should clarify that Nazis, yes, are bad because, as Ellie said, apparently some people did not get the message of that. Every ad on Twitter now is just some person either being like, haha, Hitler, sure was a great guy, wasn't he? Or like right-wing conservative anti-soy pills or something.
Shout out to the Liver King,
like, so,
friend of the pod.
I get Liver King so much. Apparently he uses steroids.
Oh yeah, he uses so many steroids. His ass must be like a fucking calcified rock. Anyway.
No, I mean, Star Wars and media more broadly is informed by the situation in which it is written. In the words of our glorious vice president, we exist in the context of all that.
What?
Have you heard Kamala Harris's like weird thing where she says like, it's quote, you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? ? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
That feels like some shit that George Carlin would say.
Well, yeah. We have Joe Rogan for a vice president is what we have.
Oh, that would be a world. It wouldn't be a good world, but it would be interesting. I bet Trump would get along better with Rogan. Oh, who's his running mate going to be? Oh my God.
No, it's going to be Nikki Haley.
Oh, you're right. It is going to be Nikki Haley, isn't it?
But Mike Pence and Donald Trump were a much funnier pair.
They hated each other.
Because one is like, the most uptight, like stick up his ass, like Indiana Christian conservative who calls his wife mother.
Right. And the other is Donald Trump. Oh, God.
How are we going to get that sort of juxtaposition between our president and vice president again?
Let's see. We need Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris, honestly. Okay, this is a waste of time.
Yeah, so like media is the context in which it is written. It cannot exist outside of that context. There isn't some magic, secret way to sort of divorce your media from the people who wrote it, and the people who wrote it can't be divorced from the time in which they live.
And if you're trying to negate that, then you're specifically negating the stuff that's contemporary to you, which is still informed by your setting, your history, the global milieu that you're swimming in. We're coming back to it. It's the idea that we talked about with Chris about a month ago. When something is written can mean about as much as its intentional messaging. And Star Wars will never avoid that because it's about war and because it's about bad guy, evil regime. That's a big part of it. Let's continue with an email from Daniel. They say, hello, daughters. Hope you are having a wonderful day. I'm Daniel, and I absolutely love your podcast. It's funny, well-written, incredibly well-researched. And the best of all, it's about politics and Star Wars, so I was instantly in love. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. In your recent episode, Resistance, Rebellion, and Revolution, both of you touched briefly on the South American military coups and how it's super hard to research it all. As someone who had to study them, yeah, they're messy and complicated. So I just wanted to talk a little about the Brazilian dictatorship and some parallels with Star Wars. Thanks, Daniel, for doing our job for us.
Yeah, thank you for saving us time and or money.
So the military coup in Brazil happened in 1964, and actually it's more commonly known as the civic military coup these days, because before it happened, a significant part of the political elite and the middle class was supporting it. A famous moment of support was a civic march in the city of Sao Paulo, known as the Families with God for Freedom. The Brazilian parliament also accepted the military coup by declaring the presidency vacant while the president was on an official trip. The military government wasn't a dictatorship on day one. They actually kept the parliament open, but with only two parties, one pro-military and one kind of against it within reason. But in 1968, the dictatorship was fully actually declared. With this act, they would close the parliament, have the power of intervention in every level of government by the military, and basically legalize torture against political opponents. This went until 1979, when the military lost all support and the economy was basically in shambles. To shift power to the people again, and eventually, in 1985, it ended with the indirect election of the first non-military president since 1964. There were resistance movements, and even some armed conflict, but they were ineffective in fighting the government. Basically, the military government ended because it destroyed the state so much it couldn't function anymore. Some tried to resist giving the power back to the civilians, and tried to do a false flag attack in 1981, but it failed. So yeah, some parallels with good old Sheev, basically doing a civic military coup, eventually shutting down the Senate, and, as we see in Andor, cracking down at all levels of government with the ISB when necessary. And of course, what Sophia always says, if not for the giant explosion of the Death Star, the Empire would still eventually be a failure. Daniel also adds, although the movements here in Brazil didn't overthrow the military dictatorship, one of the most famous resistance acts was the kidnapping of the United States ambassador in 1969. They held him in exchange for the liberation of 15 political prisoners and the reading of a manifesto on national broadcast. After the prisoners were extradited and the manifesto read, he was released, and a few months later went back to the US. But the most awesome fact about the resistance movements is that one of the members who suffered so much during the dictatorship, being arrested and tortured eventually, was elected the first female president of Brazil in 2010, Dilma Rousseff. Well, I guess it's enough Brazilian history, but Brazilian politics from the 1920 onwards are wild. There are more things to say about the First Order, the New Republic, and how here in Brazil, very recently, a former military man from that period of the dictatorship used nostalgia and fascist speech and propaganda to win the election in 2018, and how that reminds me so much of the First Order and the senators with Imperial memorabilia in Bloodline. With all the love and best wishes from Brazil, Daniel.
When he says that Brazilian politics is messy from 1920 onward, that is like the most incredibly correct thing I've ever heard. I just finished a class on racial politics in Latin America, and let me tell you, is Brazil an interesting country? You brought up, Daniel, that the military coup kind of collapsed under its own weight because autocrats don't want to govern. That would also, as we've discussed before, eventually have happened to the Empire when Palpatine finally decided to do a little too much or go a little too far, and suddenly the whole house of cards crashes down around him. Yeah, Brazil, very good actual contemporary to the Empire, perhaps, because, you know, something resembling a fully functioning democracy leading up to the dictatorship, and then, you know, obviously overthrown by a military civil coup, I think you called it, and then comes back through the collapse of a fascist-ish government. Oh, my fun fact about the Brazilian military dictatorship. The Brazilian military dictatorship really liked building BRTs, and that means bus rapid transit. It's like trying to make a subway or a light rail with buses.
Really?
Oh yeah, no, they loved it. And they don't, like, when you think of BRT, you're probably thinking of it in like the Utah context. No, these guys would build like fully elevated freeway style BRTs that are just like on viaducts the whole time. So it was kind of fun. And by fun, I mean they destroyed a lot of neighborhoods to do it, but it was cool.
I personally, it was the joke at the beginning of this episode. I personally slightly overstate how much the Republic and the Empire are the same entity, but it is obvious that when George Lucas was crafting those first 6 movies, that he was really intentional in not making Palpatine a dictator all at once. Palpatine is a senator, then he gets elected to the Supreme Chancellorship, then he governs for a while, for 13 years, and yeah, you're calling towards this conflict. There's the bullshit in the courts with Newt Gunray. And then the war happens and Palpatine does overreach and people start to see it and people start to go, oh, this sucks. And then he declares the Empire. But the Senate is still there. The Senate's there for almost 20 years. He doesn't dissolve the Senate until he has giant laser ball completed. So as far as political things in Star Wars go, the amount of time that takes is actually kind of true to form. Hitler didn't fucking do it all at once. Clearly, there are things in Star Wars that happen a little bit too fast or kind of wonky or very dramatically or whatever. Palpatine's rise to power is not one of them. So, on the subject of the First Order, so Daniel here is referencing a scene in the book Star Wars Bloodline where Senator Leia Organa, I think this is about 5 years before The Force Awakens, but I could be slightly wrong. Senator Leia Organa goes into the office of sort of a political rival that she's getting to know a little better, and she doesn't like him, but she's trying to figure out if she's going to work with him or whatever. He's a member of the opposition party. He's a member of the centrists. She's a populist. Different words. Been over this before, but different words than their real world equivalents. The centrists are the ones who want to localize power to the Supreme Chancellor seat, essentially. And the populists are kind of decentralized government, states' rights, etc.
It's the old American fight of the Jacksonians versus the Hamiltonians.
But Leia goes into this guy's office and he has a collection of wartime Imperial shit. He has helmets and a flag, I think, and just all of this regalia from the war, a war that Casterfo, that this senator was not part of, but Leia's a fucking veteran. And she goes in there and she's like, oh, no fucking way.
She's like, excuse me, sir.
Excuse me, sir. I killed the fascists who wore those helmets. As she well should have. As it happens, the centrists are not just wanting to consolidate power, they, shall we say, held authoritarian sentiments. And they're the contingent that breaks off and becomes the political arm of the First Order. So it is essential to acknowledge the way in which fascism feeds on nostalgia. Fascist movements are inherently reactionary, which comes part and parcel with a yearning for an imagined past. This is something we're going to come back to in a later email. Thank you so much for mailing in, Daniel.
Yes, thank you. That was a very fun entry.
I like the history lesson emails. And now let's read from Felicity. This email is titled Triumph of the Whills. That's Wills with a WH. A cute little Star Wars moment.
So are the Wills a species that's very fond of marching around on open fields or something? Or what am I missing here?
Okay. The word Wills dates back to early drafts of A New Hope. George Lucas conceived of the Star Wars as being written in the Journal of the Wills. This is the framing device. Later on, he started to think of the Wills as essentially microscopic organisms that directed the course of destiny and had a symbiotic relationship with midichlorians. This is weird, esoteric George Lucas bullshit.
So he really couldn't just make a sci-fi show. He had to make weird magic sci-fi show.
That's what Star Wars is, Sophie. That's what we're doing.
I know.
Yeah, anyway, so the Wills are referenced in a lot of different things. The Guardians of the Wills, right? We've talked about them as this Force religion on Jeddah. It is something that does exist. It is in canon. It is kind of in Legends. The Wills exist, but they're kind of a cheeky, not just a cheeky reference, but they are this metaphysical thing that is not very well defined. They're referenced in the From a Certain Point of View books, but in kind of a jokey way. It's one of those things where this is an idea that is part of the Force, but is not specifically fleshed out, which I think is probably correct for the Wills. Anyway, Felicity is referencing that and the Nazi propaganda film. The two are not related, except for the fact that Will and Wills.
Well, I got the last one. I was just not
Yeah. Anyway. Felicity writes, Hey daughters, absolutely adore your podcast. I was a staunch adherent to I liked Star Wars growing up, but I'm kind of past it now, until I was sat in the theater for The Force Awakens. Hearing the opening theme again, realizing I was gonna see a new Star Wars story, I found myself crying, and had to come to terms with the importance this whole universe has on me. Since then, I've thrown myself back into this obsession and feel firmly along for the ride, and your podcast is rapidly becoming a very important part of that. Thank you, Felicity. The two most important factors in Star Wars radicalization is The Force Awakens and Daughters of Ferrix podcast. Of course.
The Force Awakens is not what got me back into Star Wars. That was The Last Jedi.
That's called taste, my friend. That's called taste.
Thank you.
I have a quick film analysis question that I'm always getting people's opinions on when the subject of the original trilogy comes up. You've mentioned a few times the way George Lucas used imagery from Triumph of the Will as film shorthand to show the fascism of the Empire, which makes perfect sense considering the pulpy style he was emulating and his deep film nerd sensibilities. I've included a link link to a very short YouTube video laying the end of Triumph of the Will next to the end of A New Hope, which shows a lot of similarities as well. The heroes of the Third Reich marching down the aisle, much like Han, Luke, and Chewie marching through a conspicuously human crowd of rebels up the stairs to receive their accolades. I'm curious what you make of the similarities. Was he making a sort of in-universe propaganda film, saying this is how the rebellion would tell this story? Is there some like very subtle condemnation? All violence is at risk of becoming a celebration of strength/superiority? Did he just think it was a fun, pulpy way to end a movie? I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Thanks again for making an amazing podcast, Felicity.
As much as I'd like to be like, oh, George Lucas was, condemning the violence of the rebellion as, potentially proto-fascist in itself, I don't necessarily think that's what's going on. I think that it's called The Triumph of the Will for a reason, right? And that's because the movie is a triumph. The whole thing is meant to be this kind of just a rousing film to get your blood up, to get you feeling excited about Nazism, but it's meant to get you excited. It's meant to make you feel pride. It's meant to make you feel as though your side is going to win. When they get to that part of A New Hope and they're doing the medal ceremony and they have all the guys standing there and clapping and there's, kind of triumphalist music playing, I think it's meant to do the same thing as A Triumph of the Will, and that's make you feel like good going out of the theater, good that the rebellion is doing okay and there is hope for the future and all that sort of thing, right? I think that it probably was an appropriation of A Triumph of the Will's like aesthetic, but it wasn't for political purposes. It was for making you feel good about the rebellion, making you feel good about the movie purposes.
Well, and you mentioned it, Felicity. George Lucas is this film nerd. He knows that this movie is designed to conjure certain things. Now, for an American audience watching Triumph of the Will, there is something disturbing to it. You're seeing these people going, rah, rah, I'm a Nazi. That sucks. Watching all the guys lined up, celebrating their victory, hits a lot different if it's the home team. And that's what it is in A New Hope, is it's the home team. We've been watching Luke and Leia and eventually Han for 2 hours, and we're rooting for them. And so to use the same filmic language to do the other thing is, I think, a recognition of the fact that this stuff hits different when it's your boys,
regardless of the purposes it's being used for, that sort of image has something deep in the human psyche that it sort of provokes.
I agree. It would be interesting if it were more complicated than that. But I mean, like we've talked about before, George Lucas uses it with the Empire to make you feel that they are powerful and they are efficient and they are like the Nazis. George Lucas uses it with the rebels to make you feel like they're the good guys and that they're powerful and that they are triumphant. Thank you very much for your email, Felicity. Our next email is another one from Joel Davis. Thanks, Joel. Hello, Daughters of Ferrix. For today's email question, I wanted to get your opinion on the fall of the Empire, specifically how it was depicted in canon. I remember back in the day, one of the big discussions was if the Empire's quick fall made sense, given that it only took a year for the New Republic to consolidate itself and the Empire to completely vanish as a cohesive state. While the fracturing of the Empire made sense post-Palpatine death, most of the discourse was about the speed of it in comparison to Legends, when the fall of the Empire was a years-long process and the New Republic took a while to eventually take Coruscant. And even then, there were still major warlord factions that existed and controlled large amounts of territory, and pretty much having mini-states/empires in the galaxy. Heck, technically speaking, the Empire never fell and became a rump state called the Imperial Remnant under Gilead Pelion that eventually made peace with the Republic and even became an ally against the Yuzon Vong. But I digress. Personally, I think they've done enough to make it make sense with things like Operation Cinder, or even how many planets were waiting to rebel against the Empire, but just needed the spark, as it were. Plus, from an out-of-universe standpoint, I know a lot of this was probably cleaned up in order to set the stage for the First Order and the Sequel Trilogy, and Aftermath probably had some mandates it needed to follow. Anyway, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the speed of the Empire's fall in canon, and any thoughts you have as it is compared to Legends. Love the podcast. Sorry for the long rambly email. You're okay, Joel. Joel Davis.
I agree. I actually think that the way it's done in Legends is certainly more realistic, although probably not as convenient for the plot. If you think about personalist regimes, like, for example, let's talk about Alexander the Great for a second. I guess this is our daily thinking about the Roman Empire, sort of. When Alexander the Great died, right, he had sort of single-handedly, through his own force of personality, forged one of the largest empires that the world had ever seen up to that point. So when he dies, without an heir, without anyone to really take over for him, you'll never guess what happens. Oh yes, you get split into the Seleucids, and one Ptolemy takes over Egypt, and some guy's in Parthia, and some guy goes back to Macedonia, and a whole bunch of other successor states Greek successor states form. These things stick around for a really long time. Like, you'll have the Roman Empire battling with some of these dynasties that are founded in the aftermath of Alexander's death. So yeah, it's more realistic for the empire to fall the way it does in Legends, and for there to be a whole bunch of successor states and rump states and warlords and other such things to sort of emerge. But plot. If you want to have the plot that you have in the sequels, you can't have that happen so much.
Yeah, I mean, I find stuff like the Paleon-Gavrisum Treaty really evocative and really exciting from a political Star Wars standpoint. At the same time, they were clearing the way for The Force Awakens. And I think they filled in the gaps well. I think the year before Jakku feels long in canon. I think there's a lot there, and I think they're going to keep adding to it in some ways. But it is one of the sillier things. It's within the Star Killer base to get rid of the New Republic school of we just need to be able to do plot, which aren't my favorite choices, but that doesn't mean that the stories that come out of them later aren't worth telling, aren't fun, aren't enjoyable as a fan. Plot contrivances are part of Star Wars' DNA. They just are. The convenient thing about George Lucas's 6-episode Rise of Palpatine is that even though he didn't have it mapped out, the whole time he was like, well, I don't know, I want to do, 9 movies, 6 movies. Why am I doing a George Lucas impression?
You weren't doing a George Lucas impression. That sounded like Richard Nixon.
He has these ideas about doing multiple movies and about going back and doing the prequels, right? I want to call it episode 4 so everyone in the movie theater is confused as shit. Great idea, George. And they said no, because that's a stupid idea. God, he had this idea of doing all of these movies, and it took decades to eventually be fleshed out, to feel like it has the depth that we see it as having. And the sequels don't quite have that yet. And also, the resolution of the Galactic Civil War was much more, we gotta get this shit out of the way, which I get. I'm just glad, frankly, they didn't just decide that the Empire was over after episode 6. When I was a casual fan as a kid, that's what I assumed, right? That's what a lot of people assume. The Emperor is gone, big laser ball go boom, Empire over. I'm just glad it lasts longer than that. So A+ to J.J. Abrams and whoever for not just saying it was over then. And frankly, for only doing Jakku in like books and video games and shit, that's insane.
Oh, I want to see Jakku in a film so badly though.
It would be really cool to have it in a show or something. We're going to someday talk about the end of the Galactic Republic in canon. We'll also talk about it in Legends someday, but that's going to take way more work from me.
To talk about my beloved Yuuzhan Vong.
We will talk about the Yuuzhan Vong, yes, regrettably.
Shut up.
Anyway, Star Wars is janky, and that's sometimes a little obnoxious, but ultimately perfectly fine. Thank you very much, Joel.
Next email. I get to say it this time.
Our next email is from Dylan. Hi, Dylan. Hello, daughters. Ellie, I hope the move is going/has gone well. Portland is on the list of American cities I would like to visit one day. Thank you very much, Dylan. It has gone, I would say, really well, all things considered. There were a few difficulties in getting here, but...
I mean, should we tell them about the saga with the U-Haul or what?
No, absolutely not. We have stuff that we're doing. We're busy. We made it safe. Most of our stuff is well intact. Our cat handled the trip surprisingly well. It's all gone very, very nice. I would highly recommend Portland. I love it very much. Unlike usual, my email today is not inspired by a podcast episode. Rather, I just finished reading Bloodline for the first time, and it inspired some thoughts. Firstly, putting aside the fact that the centrists are narratively the bad guys, in a more nuanced reality, do you believe you would identify in the New Republic Senate as a centrist or a populist? Because setting aside the first orderness of it, I sort of see where the centrists are coming from. Canada, like the United States, is a federal state, and I think this causes more problems than it solves. False borders, not that all borders aren't false, make people in one province believe that they don't need to care about the needs of another province. Further, why should a Canadian in Ontario be getting worse healthcare than one in British Columbia? A strong federal government and no provinces could fix these issues, tackle the large crises of the day, and have the resources to institute fair social programs nationwide, instead of being deadlocked in jurisdiction. Plenty of modern countries maintain a unitary governing system without falling into fascism. UK, kinda, until recently at least, and France come to mind.
I I don't know. I would probably be a populist, and that's because, I have 1776 in my blood. But also, I don't know that I agree with you about, I should clarify, because, no offense, Canadian, your country's the size of California in terms of population. So a unitary state could make a lot more sense versus somewhere like, I don't know, the United States or China or Russia even is going to be a lot more difficult to kind of effectively govern the whole thing from a single point. And that's not even to mention countries like Switzerland or Belgium, or that's all I can think of at the moment, Switzerland or Belgium, that have, multiple ethnicities, multiple people, multiple cultures who can't necessarily deal with a one-size-fits-all approach. So I don't know that a strong federal government or a strong, unitary central government, I guess you would say, is going to be able to handle things as well as people think it will. Because, the UK, you mentioned that as an example, has had to devolve a lot of power to places like Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland and eventually, God willing, Cornwall. Yes, Cornish nationalism on the podcast. Because trying to have one government for the entire country, which is made of a lot of diverse interests, both in a geographic nature and a political nature, is ultimately going to lead to the largest group dominating the entire country, i.e. the English. So I don't know about federal or non-federal governments in larger countries. The problem with a strong unitary government is that it can just as easily do evil stuff as it can do good stuff. Like you mentioned, fixing healthcare. They could just as easily get rid of nationalized healthcare for the entire country and then, spend all your money on, I don't know, killing puppies. So I don't know. Probably populist.
Killing puppies 2024. I'm surprised you and I agree on this, Sophie. I do think ultimately this comes especially to questions of scale. We talk about it all the time, but the Galactic Republic oversees 1 million planets or something insane like that. That's planets. That's planets. And listen, most of those planets aren't as big as Earth in population, but they're still fucking massive. The Republic doesn't provide healthcare for its constituents. I guess it would be cool if it did, but I just don't think that's functionally possible to do it adequately.
Just thinking about it, the different medical needs of 1 billion different species as well, how do you centrally do that?
Fucking impossible. And we have to ask, what is the role of the Republic? Right? That's this question. And it kind of seems like the things that the Republic is most effective at is providing aid in natural disasters, overseeing trade agreements and shit like that.
Ellie entering her states' rights era?
I don't love the idea that you're going to have some planets on which the quality of life absolutely sucks ass, but there might be a degree to which that is the case. And I think you should try to lower that disparity as much as possible. I think the Republic should try to do what it can if it's going to exist at all. But I don't know, I think the effectiveness that a unitary government could have in a place like the US, I think there are things the federal government could and should do to improve my quality of life specifically.
To improve things somewhat.
I think.
Oh, and you don't get to say that anymore because you live in a blue state now, so shut the fuck up.
I do. I do live in a blue state. Get fucked. First time in my life that I've lived in the blue state. I do think that about the US. And part of that is because the alternative is used to do fascism. So it's okay, I can't really step outside of that. In Star Wars, it's the centrists who are, not the centrists, but the centrists who are trying to do fascism. So that can't be ignored. What sort of good can be accomplished by your central government is going to be different when you have 1 million worlds. And so I think there is only so much that the Republic can do. Leia is correct to be really cautious of a centralized state, because it kind of seems like, at least as far as the Republic is concerned, the centralized power is way easier to just misuse and way harder to do good stuff with. I don't think it's equal parts. I think it's easier to do bullshit with a centralized Republic, because I think that is a natural consequence of the scale of the thing. Dylan actually has a 2 questions here, so let's move on to the next one. Secondly, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on political spectrums away from the traditional left and right, such as the one in Bloodline, where parties are born out of different ideals than basic left or right policy. I'm curious to know if you can think of any real-world examples. I have one. In our province of Quebec, until quite recently, they operated on a political spectrum of sovereigntist, more commonly called separatists in English Canada, or federalist. If you were a separatist, you voted Parti Québécois, PQ. And if you were a federalist, you voted Parti Libéral du Québec. Quebec.
Oh, come on.
What?
Si vous êtes un séparatiste, vous choisissez le Parti québécois. Et si vous êtes un fédéraliste, vous choisissez Parti libéral du Québec.
This led to funny governments where, at one point, when the Federalists were in power, despite having an association with our federal Liberal Party, center to center left, the party leader was a man named, Sophie?
Jean Charest.
Yeah, thank you. Who had been the leader of the now defunct Progressive Conservative Party, center right. Within Charest's cabinet was a man named Thomas Mulcair.
Mulcair? I don't know.
Sure. Who would later go on to lead our new Democratic Party, center left to left wing. All that is to say that political spectrums not based on the left and right can lead to some wild alliances. Excited for the next episode, Dylan McGuire.
Oh, this is great because this is Northern Irish politics as well. You know, you have, I think it's the Democratic Unionists who are conservative unionists, and then there's like also liberal unionists, and then there's leftist nationalists and like conservative nationalists and liberal nationalists, and you have all these people, but no one actually cares about any of that. You just vote for like your ideology plus are you nationalist or are you unionist?
I think an important thing to understand about the way we think of right-left politics is that they are extremely defined by the context in which they exist, right?
Yeah, you didn't just fall out of a coconut tree.
Thank you, Kamala. What was left 100 years ago, completely different. But also, what's left in Quebec, gonna be different. And I know it's, you also have those other party, but like fundamentally, how it tends to break down is that to be on the political right is to favor hierarchy, and to be on the political left is to favor non-hierarchy, right? And what this is differs subject to subject, right? You have the social right, which is like trad wife shit, and then you have the social left, letting trans people not be genocided. But you also have like the economic right, which is ghoulish capitalism, and the economic left.
Are we doing like political compass shit here now?
Yes, we are, but I'm trying to make a point. Okay, you have the economic left, which is based. And let's be clear, these things cannot be divorced from one another in American life, and a lot of the time at all. I fundamentally believe that a capitalist system really likes other types of hierarchy and really pigeonholes certain types of marginalized people into certain roles. I don't think these can be easily divorced. But the point is that when we're talking about power and the distribution of power, the question is always how centralized is it versus how decentralized is it? What that looks like is going to differ place to place, is going to differ time to time. What issues people care about, what power people care about centralizing or decentralizing is going to vary. But that's what right and left mean, right? It's like we have these certain ideas about like what is liberal, what is conservative, and it's like, to be conservative is not to want school choice. To be conservative is to yearn for a past which never existed,
The left and right are mostly made up. There are a lot of causes that we sort of group into the quote left and the quote right that don't necessarily have anything to do with one another, but because of overriding cultural sentiments, they have been grouped in with the left and the right. Like, take, for example, I like school choice, actually.
You do you?
No, I don't like school choice. I think it's stupid. I think that public education should be mandatory. I don't actually think that. But anyways, school choice doesn't really have anything to do with, like, say, conservative social values or conservative economics, right? Like, conservative economists are famously actually in favor of public schooling generally as something that the government should do. There's a high degree to which all of these things that we associate with the right are just kind of constructed, right? Like we just made that up and we're like, well, that's a left-wing thing now.
What school choice does as a conservative talking point is act as kind of almost a dog whistle, right? School choice is not about like the social value itself. It's about if we can get students away from schools which have black people, or if we can homeschool and then control our kids and force them not to be gay, shit like that. It's a tactic.
Climate change, right? Like climate change is not necessarily like something that only people on the left should care about. I would think that if I was, a conservative, God forbid, I don't know, there's a very good conservative argument to be made against climate change. Like, we're preserving our natural heritage and we're going to ensure a good future for our children where people can raise families and ensure that we have, strong economic prospects far into the future, right?
Blood and soil, but in an ecology way.
Yes, blood and soil, but ecology.
Oh boy.
That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the left, but because of the left's priorities on other topics, it has been constructed to be just a leftist idea or left-leaning idea. You know, it's all very much, to a degree, made up.
The thing about constructs is they exist for a purpose. It is useful to be able to talk about my political team, but it is silly to think of those things as essential and to insist that they are immutable.
And necessarily aligned as well, right? Because, like, I can think of my alignment with the left. I am strongly in favor of things like racial justice and queer rights and, I don't know, unions. But there are certain things on my side of the political spectrum that I am not on board with. For example, anti-religion.
Getting laid.
What was that? Getting laid. Yeah, sure. Whatever. These things, they're not necessarily identified with each other.
Our next email is from Fia. This email is actually an adaptation of a tweet that Fia made to us probably like a month or two back. So I very much appreciate them mailing in. Hi, y'all. I love your podcast and listen near religiously. As a neurodivergent queer with a huge special interest in Star Wars, it's been a breath of fresh air and deeply entertaining and informative to become a loyal listener. I would absolutely love to hear you talk about mainstream left liberal democratic politicians, both in the United States, parentheses, fuck that, and in Star Wars, like the Squad or Bernie, Padme, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, Leia, etc. That type of person. In general, how do you suppose this sort of character prompts us to think about our own house floor pain in the ass resist lib politicians? More specifically, can't remember if it was in a Revenge of the Sith deleted scene or just lurking on Wikipedia somewhere, Bail encourages Mon Mothma to vote in favor of the Emperor's final ascendancy in order to protect her access to representative power, even though they are both profoundly against it. I think that's a really interesting move, and I would love to know what you think about that sort of thing, particularly if you think its request for us to sympathize translates over to the real world. Thank you so much for a wonderful podcast and all your work. May the cunt be with you, or whatever. Warmly, Fia.
And also with you. I feel complicated about this because the reality has been historically that has not always been the case, and a lot of people are always more interested in covering their own asses than, you know, standing up to broader ideals. But I do think that there's a case to be made of, like, staying in the institution even if it's broken. I like to talk on this podcast a lot about how important having opposition politicians cooperate with your kind of overthrow the dictator movement can be, right? Like when we talked about Otpor in Serbia, like these were allegedly liberal politicians, but they were cooperating with the regime and cooperating with its elections in order to have some access to power, and it did ultimately contribute to the downfall of the regime. So, you know, as much as I don't care for this personally, and it feels kind of gross to me, I think that there's a very strong case to be made for its utility in, you know, either maintaining or bringing back democracy.
I think in Star Wars, Padme and like Bail Organa and stuff like, and all of them, especially like in the Clone Wars, are very much written in tone to feel like the way that, you know, nominally liberal, card-carrying Democrats tend to think about their representatives, right? There is like a tonal similarity, which is why I think it makes it a little more tricky to talk about these characters, because like, I think there are some radical acts that Padme takes and that Mon Mothma takes, and I don't know if they are actually doing enough. Like, I feel like I don't fully understand their stations well enough to say that. Definitely, I don't feel like they are acting on behalf of the actual people of the galaxy enough, but like, how much is that actually their job? It's not really clear. But like, Padme does treason to try to stop the war. Mon does treason to try to stop the Empire.
The question is, who ends up succeeding?
I mean, Mon Mothma.
Right. And she stays in, and I guess that's where I'm getting
But
at.
she succeeds because she leaves, right?
Right,
Like,
but in real life...
her main power is actually kind of being rich and then being able to broadcast her message on TV, you know? Like, that's her main thing. Which is a lot of the power of liberal politicians.
But if she had done what Padme had done, would she have been able to leave at the crucial time she did and then use her influence that she has gained as an opposition politician, kind of becoming famous for opposing Imperial objectives, and then also, you know, maintaining all of this financial capital? If she had done what Padme had done, would she have actually been able to do what she ended up doing and sort of spark the rebellion in its wide scale form?
A hard thing when it comes to talking about politicians in the US who are technically on the left is that the ones who are loudest are not necessarily the ones who are doing the most or necessarily doing the best. And like leftists, kind of liberals even more so, love a manifesto. We love an idealist declaration. I love an idealist declaration. God. That's why Andor is so good. But like, I feel like Star Wars expects us to think of its good guys one way, and I think the way we actually have to think of politicians is another, and I do think there is that disconnect. It's a hard comparison to make, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And this is something I'm sure we're going to have to talk about in a lot more specificity with regard to Padme when we eventually break down her like political career, because I don't know. I tend to see Mon Mothma as a force for good, but like there are ways in which she was potentially complicit in the eventual rise of the First Order. That is possible. I think some people are way too quick to put that on her, but like, I don't know. 90% demilitarization is like so much that it's kind of insane. I think it is easier to tell what people are doing when we look at like, what are they earmarking funds for? What are they doing for their constituents? What of their campaign promises have they fulfilled? And the thing about Star Wars politicians is that they don't do shit for their constituents. We don't see them voted in.
Well, because they're not voted in.
No, not usually. They're usually handpicked or whatever.
If they happen to be from a planet that has some kind of democratic-ish form of government, the way that senators used to be elected is they would be selected by the state legislature. They have that.
Which, for all of the praise that the prequels and the Clone Wars get, I think that's silly. And I think it makes for less dynamic political storytelling. The people that the senators represent are non-existent. It's not that they don't adequately represent them, because that's part of the plot. I like that part of the plot. It's that they aren't there. The one time Padme's like, oh yeah, shit, we should probably be speaking for the people. It's people of Coruscant, and it's her going, this person that I employ doesn't have clean water on her level of Coruscant. And it's like, what? She works for you. Like, they almost never treat with this. And that is, I think, a huge failing in the way that those prequel era stories portray politics.
That's pretty bad, gotta say.
Well, we'll talk about it more someday. Anyway, thank you for this email, Fia. I'm sorry that our answers were kind of meandering and complicated, but it's a complicated question, and it's one that I would really like to get more into on this show. I think it's worth talking about in perpetuity. Let's continue on to an email from Alexander Plunkett. They write, Chua Penki Mapatisas. I was wondering, what are the political allusions of the sequel trilogy and Disney era Star Wars media? Leading up to the new movies, I was excited about what I read into the political messages of the First Order and the nascent New Republic, specifically more of an analysis of the weaknesses of a liberal democracy and the danger of not addressing the needs of your people and how that can push the needy and disaffected in extreme opposition to the powers that be. But I feel like what I read in the text differs from what message I feel like Disney wants us to believe. If I were to guess what Disney wants its consumers to value IRL, it's a firm belief in a liberal democracy. The canon seems way more in favor of Leia going off to fight, while the career politicians bicker, but Disney would be kneeling in a dashiki with New Republic Space Pelosi Mon Mothma and feeling like they really did something.
Calling Mon Mothma New Republic Space Pelosi is quite interesting.
Mon Mothma, she does tacit opposition to the Imperial government in the best way she can, and then funnels a shit ton of money to the anti-fascist crowd that she does not even always actually support what they do. She just gives them money because she knows it's anything better than what they've got. And then she risks her life by coming out publicly against it. She miraculously gets out of there and then is on the run. And then she is the leader of this insurgent government before, she becomes the Supreme Chancellor of the New Republic. Let's be clear, we don't know when she stepped down. We don't know. I don't know if it's before or after certain former Imperial worlds became part of the New Republic. Like, we don't have context for that. We have no reason to think that Mon Mothma just like postures and does bullshit. She's not this like, I guess she's a career politician, but like Mon Mothma is, I'm sorry, the real deal. I might not like every single thing she does, but she says what she means and she does it. So respect Mon Mothma's name, I think, is my takeaway. Anyway, not the point. What is the political stance of the new canon? Did Disney not look into what the Star Wars movies were saying about rebellion and about how stuff ain't great right now? Did they not care? How much is it the artists and authors versus an overall push in the canon? Love the pod. Hope I didn't ramble too much in this email. May the force be with you. I do think it's worth mentioning all Disney cares about is being not controversial while making money. Disney as an institution is not specifically interested in the type of nominal liberalism that you see from, again, the loudest politicians. That is not what Disney does. Disney makes a product and wants you to consume it. There are people who make media for Disney who have certain political ideas. But Disney as an institution does not have a political ideology besides they want like tax breaks and shit. That's just not how they seem to operate with regard to Star Wars.
They want to have their own little town in Florida, which they control completely.
And that's fucked, but like completely divorced from the way this media is produced. Now, there might be writers who feel that way. You know, Star Wars might reflect that. I don't think it really does. Maybe I'm biased, but I think a lot of Star Wars writers are better people than most Democratic politicians. Maybe it's just because I've actually met Star Wars writers and I haven't met any Democratic politicians. Anyway, I'm sorry for going hard, Alexander. Sophie, what's your read on the politics of the sequels? Because I have my specific interpretation.
I mean, the sequels are, I don't know, somehow less political than the previous entries, and that's probably intentional. There's no like George Lucas anti-Nixon psychosis in the sequels. I don't want to say it's a cash grab, but it is a little bit more of a cash grab. But the politics are still kind of just, gee whiz, wouldn't it be great if we could restore liberal democracy? Wow, I think that's a good sentiment. There's a lot less like exploration of the pitfalls of liberal democracy, of the dangers it can face, of the sort of nature of fascism that there is in the original trilogy and the prequels.
Oh boy.
Go on.
I would very much beg to differ with that. So you are right that there is a lot less political world building in the sequels, and there is less of a unified political idea that the three movies work towards in the way that George Lucas's stuff did. But George Lucas's stuff is only so politically complex because it's a hodgepodge. He changed his mind about a million things at a million different times, and so there's a lot for us to unpack in a way that I think a lot of people don't realize. There is also a lot to unpack with the sequel trilogy, but I think there are core political ideas there still. Certainly, the sequels exist because Disney bought Star Wars and wanted to make a Star Wars, right? But I think as an audience, we can read larger political themes into the films, regardless of whether or not they were intended. So I see the sequel trilogy as fundamentally about legacy. And yeah, about nostalgia. They're making a Star War to make a Star War. How does that actually bear out in the movies? Rey is this person who grew up in the ashes of a war she heard legends about. She knows the names of Han and of Luke. She knows the Millennium Falcon. Rey is a Star Wars fan. She wears a fucking X-Wing pilot's helmet while she eats dinner. She tries to use the Force because she's desperate. She's heard about it and she thinks it's cool. What Star Wars fan hasn't just tried to like levitate something with the Force? People are like, how did she learn to do that? Have you not tried that? Have you not jokingly tried to mind trick one of your friends? Like, come on. She lives in a universe where she was just told this is real. Of course she's gonna try it. Kylo Ren is also a Star Wars fan. He grew up with the weight of this war on his shoulders. He learned to be like his parents. He was trained to be a Jedi. But Kylo didn't fully understand that history or his relationship to it. He felt like the history was his, but he didn't actually get it. He didn't know his grandfather was Darth Vader. He wasn't properly educated. So when he learns that, it destroys his relationship to the story that defined his life. He's caught up in this internal conflict between wanting to move on because the war hurts him and wanting to cling to it because it's what he feels entitled to. And he continually chooses the latter, eventually deciding that the only person who can decide to end the war should be him. However, fascism functions as a movement. It can't just come down to the individual. We're not just talking about metaphor here. So the First Order and its leadership are reactionary. They're intent on return to the Galactic Empire. The Empire is the Second Reich, and they're the third. They believe in a fiction of strength, of power, and they map that onto the past imperial regime they're descended from. All they want is the old thing, the old way, essentially for its own sake, because it being older than what they currently have makes it automatically better. It's contextless nostalgia. Think of Ransom Casterfo in his collection of artifacts. Think of those fashy fucking Twitter accounts with the white statue profile pictures that are all about how Western art has degenerated. I think that in the First Order is a more cogent understanding of fascist culture than anything that we actually see in the original trilogy. Our good guys in the sequels are the ones who take the legacy of the past conflict and fascism and do something with it. Poe learns to helm the resistance, which his rebel parents never quite did. They were soldiers, but they weren't leaders. Finn and Janna reject the lie. They recognize that as stormtroopers, all they're doing is harming others, and they refuse to take part in that. Rose comes from poverty. She's marginalized, and she comes into it without that inheritance and acts as a voice of reason, saying that a better world is both necessary and possible. Rey does something similar. Kylo Ren promises her meaning and self-determination through reactionary conservative politics. And she comes to understand that that's hollow. That sucks. It hurts people. It makes the world worse. She says no, and ultimately, Ben learns from Rey's rejection. The sequels also seem to say that while the opposition of an organized few is good and necessary, in order to actually get rid of authoritarianism, it has to come from public will. The Empire persists past the Galactic Civil War because some people, especially the powerful, are still friendly to it. The Inner System's Imperial remnant persists. When they dissolve, the New Republic tolerates them. I don't think that same tolerance exists in the galaxy anymore, because the First Order reminded everyone how miserable the Empire was. Like, obviously, the sequels have some jank to them. They are less interested in the Republic and the Senate than the prequels were. They're not that much less interested in that stuff than the original trilogy was, though. And they are interested in their own anti-fascism. They are interested in how the First Order functions and why it fails. Whether or not you think that was executed to its fullest potential in the films, that's your opinion, but it is there. There are ideas there. There is something worth reading. And I think it is a mistake to view it as devoid of that because it's pretty easy. I don't know. It's right there on the page. That's all I'll say about that.
It's right there on the page? What page?
Of the script? I don't know. It's the text. When we're referring to a text, that itself is like skeuomorphic language, so it seems reasonable to refer to it as the page.
Oh, the metaphorical page. Okay.
Our last email is a correction via Matthew C. We actually heard from a couple of people letting us know that we kind of got some stuff wrong in our episode about the Imperial Inquisitorius. So thank you to everyone who contacted us and let us know about that.
And also go fuck yourselves whenever wrong.
Thank you. Matthew says, "Hi, daughters. Big fan of the pod. Appreciate the perspectives you're bringing to Star Wars. I wanted to write to you today about the end of Better Them Than Me, when the situation in Myanmar was discussed. I think there's some context here y'all missed. TLDR, the Rohingya genocide is not the proximate cause of the Myanmar civil war. The military overthrew the government because of the 2020 election results, and the resulting mobilization is not due to the earlier persecution of the Rohingya ethnic minority, which started around 2016. Myanmar, previously Burma, was ruled from the 1960s to the 2010s by a military junta, which took power in a coup. Aung San Suu Kyi is a longtime politician and civil society member who entered government during the move to democracy in the 2010s. It was during her time in power that extremists in Myanmar's society, with the help of the military, began ethnically cleansing Rohingya Muslims. This genocide, aided extensively by Facebook's inability to moderate, took place under Suu Kyi's rule. She has been criticized for her inaction toward these attacks. The current situation in Myanmar is, following elections in 2020 in which the party representing the military won very few seats in parliament, the military launched a coup in February 2021. Following months of massive street protests that were met with increasing amounts of lethal force, many young people decamped from the cities and formed guerrilla units known as the People's Defense Forces. They and many older, more established, sometimes for decades, ethnic armed organizations have formed loose coalitions against the junta. Thanks for taking the time to read this. I really like the podcast, and I offer this context and criticism knowing y'all want to get it right. Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah, Matthew is correct here, and this problem is mostly due to me being a big dumb idiot who talks too much.
Come on.
No, seriously, because I've been following this since it started, and I actually do kind of know all of these things, but I said something else anyway. So that was not a good move on my part. So I'm sorry for spreading misinformation. That is bad. Me when I spread misinformation, etc., etc., etc.
I like that your apology is actually I knew it all along.
No, the thing is I should have remembered all of these things when I was talking about it, because I do remember being in high school and listening to all this crap on NPR. Should have done better. So sorry.
It's okay, Sophie. We should hold ourselves to a standard of reasonable accuracy.
Yeah, so we don't become like my other podcast, which is the Real Lies podcast, as we call it.
Thank you very much for your correction, Matthew. We said it at the top of the pod. It can be really hard to get stuff right first time, particularly in the email section, because we will usually research and write and source the body of the episode, but the emails part tends to be a little more off the cuff. That's kind of what we're dealing with this episode. If we've said anything insane, please let us know. And I try to fact check stuff as the editor, but like I don't always. Like I'm not going to pretend that I check every single thing that we claim.
I try to check things as an editor, but sometimes, I don't.
If you, listener, or Matthew, if you want to interpret that as carelessness or as irresponsibility, go ahead. I don't know. I feel like I maybe don't need to spend more time working on this podcast than I already do, even though I want it to be really good and I want it to be really accurate. My point is, thank you for allowing us to outsource being accurate to you. Be sure to call us on our bullshit in the future if you notice it. We will try to also notice it, but we really appreciate people contacting us in good faith and telling us when we fucked up, because we're doing this show in good faith. We want to do it right. We're not just here to seem correct and smart.
Speak for yourself. I'm doing it in bad faith.
Okay, Sophie's doing it in bad faith. We're not just here to be smart and talk and seem right and make you think the most of us or whatever. We're here to, I don't know, talk entertainingly about Star Wars in a way that is nominally responsible and worth doing. Thank you for being more correct than Sophie.
Rude. The woke mob of our email section is attacking me.
Truly, the inaccuracies present in Daughters of Ferrix is a testament to the failure of their DEI hosts. All right. If you have any questions, suggestions, or corrections, you can send them to our show email, daughtersferrix@gmail.com.
If you want to listen to new episodes as they release every other Wednesday, you can find us on most places you can listen to podcasts. You can find sources for this episode on our website, daughtersofferrix.com, and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FerrixPod, FerrixPod.
If you want to support the show, visit patreon.com/Daughters of Ferrix. I've been Eleanor Mueller. You can find me at The Letter Bomber on most platforms. Sophie, what about you?
You can find me at Sophia and SLC on Twitter, and also at my other podcast, The Red Line Podcast, at the @redline_pod on Twitter.
This episode was edited and produced by me, Eleanor Mueller. Our podcast art is by Jill Mueller. Our intro and outro music was arranged by me, with themes by Nicholas Bertel and John Williams. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophie.
I'm gonna stop my recording now.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, fucker. Do it. Do it.
Stop recording.
Bet you won't.
It won't stop.